So it's been 7 years since Naughty Dog's masterpiece The Last of Us was released on the PS3. And after 6 years in development, we finally get a chance to continue Joel and Ellie's story with The Last of Us Part 2. So is this game really worth the wait? I don't know. Let's find out. Just real quick, I want to say that any major story spoilers are going to be confined to one section of this review. It's going to be marked along with having a timestamp which you can skip to in order to avoid them. That being said, this video will contain minor visual spoilers throughout. So now that's out of the way, let's talk about the game. The Last of Us Part 2 is a direct sequel to the first game, picking up Joel and Ellie's story 4 years after the closing of the first one. And yeah, the gameplay is just about the same as the first one, although in my opinion, Naughty Dog has improved it in just about every single way. You still have the infected to fight, and they're just as aggressive as before, except this time they feel even more threatening as you can't just stun lock them to death with your fists. Instead, you now have the ability to do a little dodge, which is going to carry you through any close encounter situation. And I think it's a really good change and makes the combat feel deeper and more intense when you actually have to pay attention to what the guy you're fighting is doing.
Since when did you learn how to use CQC?
Although I was a bit disappointed with how weak Ellie's knife slashes still felt compared to Joel's massive falcon punches. She still has the switchblade from the first game and you can use it throughout the entire game, but the slashes just don't feel as visually satisfying. Luckily, you're going to find plenty of melee weapons, and these things still give out spankings. Just like in the first game, these will stun lock most enemies and can usually kill someone in a few hits before they break. There's also a really good variety of these weapons, even though most of them can really just be put into 3 categories: blunt, bladed, and heavy, with heavy weapons dealing more damage, but breaking faster. And I thought the variety was really cool, but was pretty disappointed that they mostly use the same death animations, which for some reason just always really bugs me. I mean, if your game's 20 hours long and there are only 2 or 3 kill animations for any weapon, with numerous weapons still sharing them, it's going to get really old before the credits roll. I had the same problem with the new God of War, and honestly a lot of games do the exact same thing. I just think considering how much work went into every area of the game and how many unique animations there are, they just should have spent a bit more time putting these in. And yeah, maybe 1 or 2 wouldn't solve the problem, but it would definitely go a long way in hiding it. Now, one area that definitely doesn't suffer from this problem is the gun combat, because my god, is the gore system just amazing. So the shooting's pretty standard stuff with not many big changes from the last, and so if you've ever played a Naughty Dog shooty adventure, you're going to be right at home. So you still have 2 weapon categories, pistols and long guns, and until you find the proper items in the world through exploring, you can only have 1 of each equipped. And the guns this time around just feel so powerful. I mean, headshots will send piece of an enemy's skull flying while blood spurts from a huge dynamic wound as their heartbeat slowly fades.
Let's go. How many guys did you see?
And even body shots are really satisfying, with some of the higher caliber guns being able to completely rip limbs off of dudes. It's honestly pretty shocking the first time you do it, as the enemy just rolls around screaming, and eventually gets quieter and quieter before going down for the long run. And what's even more impressive is that it seems to be a completely dynamic system as opposed to preset points where the models can break apart. Instead, The Last of Us Part 2 lets players run around robocopping turds left and right. And even better are the explosives, like the explosive arrows that you can now craft, which will turn just about anyone into a red stain on the ground. And that's if they're lucky. Others will find they've caught a bad case of being cut in half if they take an arrow to the leg or the arms. And after playing it and watching more footage, I want to say that this is the most viscerally satisfying combat I've ever seen in any game. The improvements don't stop there though. We've also got a few moves that allow the combat arenas to feel more varied. The minor ones are climbing on ropes and jumping, which allow for more vertically spaced arenas, while still feeling pretty natural. These are used more than anything during environmental puzzles where Ellie's exploring and needs to jump a gap, and beyond that, don't add that much of anything. Now the huge addition is the ability to crouch and go prone in grass. It's a really big send-off from the stealth system in the first game, as instead of only hiding behind walls and little boxes most of the time, you're going to be in these huge sprawling areas with nothing but grass between the cover options, so you're going to need to crawl your way around to best position yourself. And because you can still be spotted while in the grass from quite a distance, it's usually super intense when somebody walks near you. Usually having your crosshair trained on his face in case he sees you and you have to quickly kill him before escaping the area or taking a more aggro fight. Later in the game, they also added hunting dogs that can track your scent, and then all of a sudden you can't just be stationary in the grass. You have to either move, distract the little guy, or kill him. And the last one is always hard. I mean, yeah, they're trying to kill you and eat your face off, but with how good the sound effects, modeling, and animations are for these guys, it's almost impossible to not feel bad killing them. And if you don't, I have no problem saying you're a freak, you psycho. Another big improvement comes from the AI getting much smarter. The human enemies communicate with each other and move around in groups, so it's harder to catch one of them unaware without alerting others. And when you are in combat, the enemies feel very threatening. at least on the higher difficulties, and can kill you super fast if you don't take them out quickly or run for cover. And even in cover, I can't tell you how many times I got flanked while looking in a different direction.
Light 'em up!
And when you do take the fight, you better hope you can hit your shots quick, because their bullets pack a Tarantino-sized punch. So you're going to be on your butt plenty. And honestly, I think it's a little annoying. Like, sometimes it feels like you should have the absolute drop on someone while pre-aiming a corner that they're walking around, and all of a sudden you're on the ground. But at least you can turn these moments around if you resist the urge to spam every button to get up, and instead take aim from the ground. Outside of them being smarter, they're also just much more believable in general. And again, the way they communicate goes well beyond what you might expect from bullet fodder enemies. And one of my new favorite things is how there's some sort of AI naming system where when you kill somebody, their buds might call out their name as if they really did just watch their friend get murdered in front of their eyes. I'm not sure why this isn't a feature in more games, because it really humanizes the enemy AI in a really interesting way. And the enemies weren't the only ones to get an upgrade either. Your companions you'll have during certain sequences will actually help you out and be useful this time around. I mean, in the original, I can't count the number of times the AI was doing weird stuff, so already them not clomping all over the place and acting like a fool is a big improvement. And they took it one step further and actually let them use their guns for shooting bad guys instead of them just being handheld noisemakers. I mean, these guys aren't going to beat the game for you by any means, but it's cool having an ally that actually makes you feel like you can trust them, rather than them just being essentially an exposition dumping stormtrooper. So now let's talk about the game world, environmental puzzles, and collecting things. So The Last of Us Part 2 is absolutely gorgeous, and I don't think I've seen a console game look so good since Red Dead 2. Although in my opinion, this game blows it out of the water in a lot of ways, which makes a lot of sense considering the difference in scale. The Last of Us Part 2 is a mostly linear game with some really confined areas and some huge outdoor areas that act sort of like an exploration hub. And every single area, every corner of the map is so beautifully detailed and crammed with stuff to look at. I mean, it blew my mind with how many buildings there actually are to explore. Usually when you're looking at a game this big, you might walk around and find plenty of invisible walls and doors that look like they should open, but they don't. And I really didn't get that feeling from this game. It almost always felt like if you spent the time to go over to an area, there was always something there to reward you. And not with a lazy reskin, but with a uniquely crafted building with models specific to that building. Early on in the game, there's a section where you get a map and start finding points of interest to visit. And it's there that you're going to start to understand that the world is filled with hidden moments and stories, and while you weirdly never get another map or hub area quite as large, it made me interested enough to fully explore every other area of the game so I wouldn't miss out on any encounters secretly tucked away. And while exploring, you're going to find environmental puzzles, which usually have you jumping across gaps, throwing a rope in just the right way to allow you to reach some new area, or trying to find the combination to one of many safes around the world. And I never got tired of the more exploration-based puzzles, but these safe ones really started to wear on me. They just don't fit very well into the world and are really the only things that feel gamey. So pretty much when you see one of these safes, you need to look around the area, usually for a letter, which will either outright tell you the combination, or let you know somewhere else you should look. And it just feels so unnatural. I mean, no one's going to be putting their valuables in a safe and then leave detailed instructions on how to break in 2 feet away. Or even some of the harder ones that have you looking for the day that 2 buttholes locked eyes for the first time. You don't have to look very hard before you find the calendar in perfect condition. And what do you know? 24 years into the apocalypse, these people luckily mark the exact date, and luckily, you don't even have to flip through it because it's right on top. It just feels lazy to reuse this mechanic over and over when they're so easy and brain dead that they feel like they're just there to stall your progress for a bit. And once you do finally get them open, you're going to be rewarded with ammo, weapon scraps, pills, and crafting materials. The weapon scraps can be used to upgrade your guns at a workbench, which is really cool this time around, as every gun has custom animations for what's being upgraded, and following it, your gun model reflects the changes you made. Pills can be used to purchase character upgrades, like the ability to craft a pistol silencer, or move much faster while prone. And I really like the character upgrade system this time around and how it requires you to explore and find magazines, which then unlock new upgrade paths. And the crafting materials, of course, are used to craft items. This pretty much hasn't changed from the original, and it works just as well here. Alright, so at this point I'm getting into major spoiler territory, so if you don't want those, skip to the timestamp on the screen. Anyways, that was your warning, so I'm going to continue on in 3, 2, 1. So, 4 years after the first game, we find Joel and Ellie living in Jackson with Joel's brother Tommy, as part of a large community. Over the years, Joel and Ellie have had a falling out over Joel's decision to kill the Fireflies to save her, and it's pretty lame having to watch Ellie be so freaking rude to Joel, and it's really painful to have grown so invested in their story, only for their relationship to have fallen apart during the time jump. So after we get introduced to the new cast of characters, like Ellie's girlfriend Dina, and Dina's baby daddy Jesse, we're back in the action patrolling the mountains and killing infected, and at the same time another group is traveling through those mountains looking for Joel. In the early sections you swap back and forth between playing Ellie, Joel, and a girl from the other group named Abby, who's pretty much what you'd get if Susan Strong grew up in this universe instead of in Ooh.
I'm seeing double.
There are some really cool sequences where Abby's running from a huge horde of infected, and they keep pouring in from every area of the force until she eventually runs into Joel and Ellie, who help her escape. She ends up bringing them both back to where her group is staying to escape the horde, but it quickly goes south as Joel goes weak in the knees, and then Abby starts practicing her golf swing on Joel's body and head. Ellie ends up finding them, and while being held down, watches Abby deal the final blow to Joel.
Please stop! Please don't shoot! Joel, please get up!
Now, I know a lot of people were really upset with how Joel died in this one, and I was also disappointed that we didn't get much more of them together, because it was their story that made the original what it was, and it made me feel kind of empty with how dirty they did Joel through pretty much the entire game. Even though he dies at the start, we do get numerous flashbacks throughout Ellie's section of the game, which go back up to 3 years, and they at least give you some of the Joel-Ellie moments that a lot of fans were hoping for.
You're just too skinny. You need to eat more.
You're welcome.
Even if only one of the flashbacks feels truly happy between the two. In that flashback, Joel takes Ellie camping for her birthday, and they visit an old museum which was having a dinosaur and space exhibit before the infection. I love getting to walk around and talk about the dinosaurs with Joel.
Actually, it's a Deinonychus.
And climbing into a space shuttle for a really cool birthday surprise. Even though not all the flashbacks are happy, I love the way they build on each other and give context to their changing relationship all the way until the day before he was killed. And yeah, maybe they had some problems, but it was clear that they still loved each other, and after Joel dies, that anger that Ellie's feeling can also be felt as a player, and it fuels the next 10 hours as Ellie travels to Seattle to get revenge on the group that killed him. And I actually liked Ellie's whole section, although I've got to say I'm a complete sucker for revenge stories, with one of my favorite movies being I Saw the Devil, in which some guy tracks his wife's killer and constantly beats the stuff out of him before letting him go so that he can then do it again. So the section in Seattle takes place over 3 days while Dina and Ellie try to find and bring back Tommy, who's also out for revenge. I think it's pretty compelling, and the world and gameplay is just so dang cool that I found myself really invested in our quest and wanting to reach the next large story moment. Throughout the days, you'll also end up dealing with a couple of new factions, the Wolves, who are currently at war with the Scars for areas of land in Seattle. And that conflict is a backdrop for the entire story, with most notes and letters found around the world in some way relating back to it. It's actually pretty interesting, and I really liked how you hear about the Scars from the Wolves during the first 2 days before ever even encountering the first one. And after seeing all the violence they leave in their wake, you end up sort of building them up as this crazy, dangerous, and brutal cult. So when you finally meet them in day 3, it's a really cool moment. And I loved how they felt completely different from the Wolves, with how they use foliage more for stealth and communicate mainly with whistles, instead of just being a reskinned enemy with the same AI. So after the 3rd day, everyone from the killer's group is dead except for Abby, and at this point Ellie's done some terrible stuff in pursuit of her revenge. So in a totally strange and jarring cliffhanger, Abby finds Ellie's group and gets the upper hand on all of them, and then we cut to a flashback where we play as young Abby from 4 years ago. We find out that she's the daughter of the doctor that Joel kills to save Ellie in the climax of the first game, and that's her reason for tracking him down. And at this point, I understood what Naughty Dog was trying to do by showing that even though what she did seems awful to us Joel fans, once you know her story, you know what drove her to do it, and instead of her being a straight villain, you see that it's more of a gray area again. And if all you knew was Abby's story, it's easy to see why everyone in the group would feel that Joel should pay for what he did. However, this one flashback is enough to hammer the point home, and instead of continuing on, we start Seattle Day 1 again as Abby. And I think this section's really going to sour a lot of people's feelings about the game. I mean, the very first section where you play as Abby in Seattle, I remember thinking, alright, well maybe it's just a small section. But then I started finding pills and weapon scraps on the ground, and that was when I felt the dread creep over me as I realized that I had another 8 or 9 hours to play, and it wasn't going to be as Ellie.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
And the problem is it's really hard to shake that feeling, and it makes the first few hours as Abby feel like a total chore. It feels a bit like when you're watching a series, and in between seasons they add a new character, and then they expect you to accept and even like this character, even though you have little to no interest in him. I mean, even just looking at her model for the first few hours was really bugging me. And it's because there was this bug where Ellie had these tiny ass arms in the cutscenes leading up to the swap, So I was so sure that Abby's massive arms were the result of something going wrong with her mesh. But nope, that was really just the vision. I mean, it literally looks like they took a woman's head and stuck it on this very muscly body, and it ends up looking so strange. Also, I'll just say I'm not a fan of the braid, and that's really it. The good news though, she puts on a jacket for day 2 and most of 3. And with my mind finally able to focus on something else, I started coming around to Abby's story and even liking her as a character. And yeah, maybe it's not hard connecting with someone after playing as them for so long, but I think it's also because she has all these really cool set pieces. And in fact, her section has some of my favorite moments in the entire game. Like when she's captured by Scars and then has to fight her way out of a dark forest filled with infected using pretty much just her...
Monumental jumbo hulking enormous humongous boundless mountainous elephantine astronomical stupendous Herculean Brobdingnagian.
arms. Another one is when she has to cross this sky bridge that the Scars have built on old cranes. Now, I have a real problem with heights, so my hands were already sweating as soon as she got on it, but that just kept getting worse and worse until she finally falls off of it and goes straight through a roof. It's like the stuff nightmares are made out of. Next is the entire section which is spent on the Scars' home island. You fight through these villages to find Lev, who's a Scar that was cast out because of his lifestyle choices. Just in time for the wolves to start an assault. Then all of a sudden you're stuck in the middle of a ground war just trying to escape. It ends with this amazing cinematic ride through the burning village and is quickly followed up with this disgusting boss fight. So at the end of the 3rd day as Abby, you play through the meeting of Ellie and Abby again, but this time you're in Abby's shoes, and after a small cutscene you're forced to fight for your life against Ellie. And it's rough because there's nothing I want to do less than take a dump on Ellie. But you gotta do what you gotta do. After the fight, Abby lets Ellie and Dina go back home, and she takes Lev to go find the Fireflies in Santa Barbara.
Come on.
The game then skips ahead and we find Ellie and Dina living on a farm together with Dina's new son. You do some stuff around the house, and at first it feels like the happiest ending these characters could have possibly hoped for. And then the cracks start to show, and we find that Ellie still can't forgive herself for not helping Joel. And she definitely can't let Abby get away with it. She ends up following Abby and Lev to Santa Barbara, but not before we get the last Abby section of the game. She arrives in Santa Barbara only to be captured by a different faction called the Rattlers and put into a work camp. When Ellie finally gets there, she follows Abby's tracks and finds out where she's being held. What's really cool about this section is that the art assets from the Santa Barbara section are totally different from anywhere else in the game. There are palm trees, and the infected wear completely different types of clothing, and the houses are modeled in the Santa Barbara style. The enemies are also a bit tougher, as the Rattlers are almost always wearing some sort of body armor, and sometimes even a helmet, which protects from headshots unless shot in the faceplate. So after reaching the camp where Abby's being held, you're told that she's out on the pillars, which are essentially these wooden poles where the prisoners that cause trouble are strung up to die. Ellie finds Abby and Lev, who at this point have been in the work camp for months, and are completely emaciated. Ellie rescues them and they head to the boats to escape, but before they leave, Ellie says that she can't let it go and that she needs to fight Abby. Next, there's a pretty lame fight scene which felt really out of place to me, and then Ellie lets them both leave alive while she heads back to her farm only to find it completely empty. In the end, she stops seeking revenge to fix the hurt she's feeling and tries to move on with her life and hopefully learns to grieve in a healthier way. So looking at the whole story, I guess that I really do like a lot of it. Not many games try to tell such an ambitious multi-threaded tale like this one does. Although I did have some issues with the pacing in the middle, and it sort of makes it hard to want to replay the game again, knowing that it's essentially 2 different campaigns in one game. It's sort of like if you're playing Resident Evil, and before you finish the game as Jill, it stopped you and then required you to play the whole game as Chris, before then allowing you to finish your original campaign. And honestly, I keep thinking that if we hadn't been through a whole game playing as Joel and Ellie, and all we knew about The Last of Us was Abby's story, it would hold up extremely well. I mean, yeah, the start was a little slow, but once I got past the frustration of getting cucked, I did end up enjoying it. And I guess it just feels so much worse than it actually is, because it's so weirdly inserted into a different story that you're already way more invested in. But if you're willing to give it a chance, it'll really get back to you. Once you meet Abby's group and spend time getting to know them, the anger and hate-filled moments from the first half as Ellie start making you feel a bit more confused as those bad guys become multi-dimensional human beings. I also really like that Abby's arc is one of her seeking redemption, sort of mirroring Joel's from the first game, finding something they care about more than themselves and then being willing to burn everything else to the ground for them.
Come on, those were your fucking people.
Hey, you're my people.
Listen to me. We're gonna have to fight to get out of this, okay? And then I need you to show us to those boats. We don't let anybody stop us. Yeah?
So overall, my feelings about The Last of Us 2 are generally very positive. The story is going to be extremely divisive, and while I personally like the story in the first better, I really love this game just based on the gameplay and the settings alone. I also think that while the game's user score has taken a real beating, once some time has passed and more people have had time to fully play the story and then let it breathe, the general sentiment is going to turn around and this game will be able to stand next to the original, but on its own merits.
Do it! Do it! Come on, kill me! I'm here! Come on! Do it now! Kill me!
I was lucky enough to avoid any spoilers and leaks, and I think if you can possibly avoid all the chatter going on right now until you play it, it will be worth it. I mean, there's so many amazing moments to be had in this game that it's hard not to recommend it. And yeah, maybe you won't be happy with the story, but I can guarantee that you'll be having a blast actually playing the game through the entire 20+ hour campaign. So I guess for my final score, I'm going to go ahead and give The Last of Us Part 2 4 disappearing acts.
Silver lining.